Jacqui Collins, Disability Advisor, TAFE South Australia, and Mark McCarran, Lecturer, Cookery, TAFE South Australia, discuss what reasonable adjustments could be put in place for a new student.
So I'm just checking before I have any more conversations with the student. I have a student who's interested in studying the Certificate 2 in kitchen operations. They've identified some possible barriers and that they might need some support undertaking the qualification. So the student who I met with, we're in the process of actually developing that access plan, but I just wanted to check with you around some of the reasonable adjustments that we're thinking about putting into that access plan. For example, this student has difficulties with reading and writing, in particular being able to get the process from mind to paper. So we discussed verbal assessments as a possible reasonable adjustment. Do you see any potential issues with the inherent requirements or any of the units within the qualification?
Thanks, Jacqui, for calling in here and actually having a chat about this. So, so certainly doing a theory adjustment for someone that's actually struggling in that sort of department is really feasible for us in cookery. We can do verbal assessments, for someone that's actually struggling to actually, transfer information from mind to paper. We can certainly do that. We can assist too in the classrooms, in the practical aspect as well, with recipes as well, by actually doing demonstrations too. So, there's capacity to be able to do that, Jacqui, with this student.
Okay. So another concern was the reading skill. So we were looking at, he's very good with computers, so we were looking at some assistive technology, for example, text-to-speech, and we were thinking about whether we could provide him with a laptop and he'd be able to use that in his class to read the recipes. Is there any foreseeable issue with that?
No, look, that'd be great. Look, if the capacity we have here for learning technology in the classroom exists, so absolutely, if we can actually set that up, if the student can bring that into class, that would be magnificent. So we can actually get him actually be able to access information that we have via our intranet and via just information that we provide through USBs, etc., for him to actually have some extra time and using that technology to be able to actually view and actually be able to consider the information that we have for the actual training in theory and in practical as well.
So would it be a matter of, once we put this in the access plan, for example, verbal assessments and the use of the laptop in the kitchen, and also for you to provide electronic resources, would it then be the student who would negotiate when the verbal assessments need to occur, or how would you manage that?
So my suggestion would be, so we would still actually run a traditional theory classroom, for example, and then instead of the student actually sitting through a theory assessment and pen to paper, we would actually take the student aside, set up a time to do it, and I could actually physically scribe and actually just speak to the student about the theory assessments that are required through the actual theory assessment aspect, if you like. The practical is where we would actually look to actually do demonstrations, and certainly using a laptop in the kitchen would be feasible too. Again, that could perhaps be something that could be worked through in an actual workplace too. To actually be able to actually read and actually be able to actually produce food based on recipes, etc.
So I think it would be really important if you were to document when yourself and the student have negotiated when a verbal assessment might take place. So whether you put that in a student file, and it could be things like recording the day, the date, what was a reasonable adjustment, for example, verbal assessment, and also identifying if there were any particular struggles or successes, just so it builds a bigger picture that then when we meet again with the student, we can reflect on that, on what could be improved or what wasn't. So at this stage, I think we can implement a lot of them into the access plan, and then it would be good if we could meet with the student together and really sit down and determine when those reasonable adjustments, such as the verbal assessment, can be implemented, and then we'll record that on our end.
This video was produced for the Disability Awareness Supporting Students in VET resource. For more information, visit www.disabilityawareness.com.au.